The scriptures for today's message, What Would Jesus Say About Mental Health, comes from Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 33. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, crying out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." May the Lord bless us as we read his word. As we finish nearly 3 months of dealing with the challenges of a world facing the global pandemic, one of the tolls that we are facing today is the effect that COVID-19 is taking, not just on our physical health, but our mental health as well. Even before this pandemic, a survey done in the United States, Switzerland, and New Zealand found that 80% of all people will have struggled with some form of mental illness, depression, anxiety issues, post-traumatic stress syndrome, bipolar disorder, or thoughts of suicide by the time they reach the midlife period. 1 in 5 people will deal with serious anxiety issues each year, and that was before the pandemic. If you are experiencing any of these troubles, one of the things I think Jesus would say to you is, you are not alone. Others around you are struggling with these things as well. It's part of being human. The American Psychological Association released a report in October 2018 that found that today's young people, aged 7 to 24, are more stressed than any other generation in American history. Or in America today, I should say. Maybe in American history too. 1 in 10 young adults, age 18 to 25, seriously considered suicide. That's a 50% increase since 2009. There are a number of reasons why the numbers are so high. Young people are more willing to talk about mental health than previous generations, and that's a good thing. People of my generation and my parents' generation were more likely to see problems with mental health as a sign of weakness, maybe even spiritual failure. There was a time when even physical problems were seen as a sign of spiritual failure. In Jesus' time, his disciples asked him, "Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus had to tell them that physical problems weren't necessarily anyone's fault. And I think he would say the same about mental health issues today. A second reason for the high numbers in stress and anxiety and other issues that people are feeling is that social media has influenced our mental health in a negative way. Sometimes it's because of the seemingly perfect lives that we portray in our smiling faces on Facebook. And other times it's because of the negativity, bullying, and hate speech that we find there. It is no accident that the rate of use and exposure to social media has risen at the same time and about the same rate as the rate of thoughts of suicide in young people. 20% of young people feel worse after having viewed social media than they did before. Depressed people, seeing all those perfect lives online, feel even more depressed and discouraged. Taking a sabbatical from Facebook is sometimes the best thing you could do for your health. A third factor pushing the high numbers of anxiety today is that young people feel the need to be perfect to get the approval of their parents. A recent survey said that about 1 to 3 feel that way. 1/3, 33% feel that they have to be perfect to get the approval of their parents. And finally, at the same time that suicidal thoughts have been going up, we have seen a rapid decrease in involvement with church and expressions of faith. Without faith, many are without hope. The fact that younger people are willing to talk about their struggles is a gift, My mother had problems with anxiety that got worse as she got older, but she wasn't willing to get any help for it. And I'm sure that most of the years she lived after my dad died, she was depressed. As a child, I had a relative who my parents talked about in hushed tones. Something was wrong with her, mentally or emotionally. The lesson we learned is that we don't talk about things like that. A cousin of mine committed suicide, and I still feel bad that we didn't see her hurt and couldn't help her in some way. But we didn't talk about it. For most of us baby boomers, there was a stigma associated with mental health issues that tended to say that they are a personality defect to get over and not something to address openly. But consider this. The first week of our isolation, before things were totally shut down in the area, I bit into a piece of metal in my toast. It wasn't until I went to brush my teeth that I realized that half of one of my molars, including an old filling, was missing. And even though we were trying to avoid going out of the house, I called my dentist and sought his care. And after an examination, it was decided I needed a crown, which I will get after things are a bit more settled down with this virus thing. Or sooner, he told me, if the pain got to be so much I couldn't wait, and he could give me an emergency treatment then. The point is, when we have a physical problem, we think nothing of going to ask a help from a professional for it. No one is going to think less of me as a person because I need a crown for my tooth. It should be the same way about our mental health issues. We should not be ashamed of asking for the help of a professional. I take an over-the-counter medicine every day to fight acid reflux and heartburn. I don't feel ashamed of doing that. Many of the young adults I know take something to help them with depression and anxiety. Others find that they can get the help they need talking to a friend or a pastor or a counselor. There is no shame in getting that help any more than taking heartburn or cholesterol medicine. What can we do to improve our mental health? Well, some of the things we can do include investing in meaningful relationships. And secondly, getting proper amounts of sleep. Sleep is so important for our mental health. And it might be that you're doing things that make it harder for you to sleep, like reading social media right before you go to bed. Or in my case, I used to read dystopian novels and then had nightmares about how bad things were in my dreams. So I found that for me, praying for those in need and those on my list helps me to get prepared for sleep. And I don't feel bad drifting off to sleep with prayers for people on my mind. Exercise and having a proper diet are another thing that's important for us for our mental health. Talking to someone, a pastor, a counselor, a friend, and don't be afraid to take medication if your doctor advises it. And last but not least, trust in God and have faith. Robert Whitley in Psychology Today magazine reports that higher levels of religious belief and practice is associated with better mental health, including lower rates of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and suicidal behavior. He goes on to say that physical health was also reportedly better among believers. We need to be aware, however, that not every church will yield these results. If the church you attend focuses on shaming you every week or making you angry at other people, instead of teaching the love of God and giving you hope and calling you to love your neighbor, then they could actually increase your feelings of mental unwellness. What would Jesus say to us about mental health? In the Bible times, they had all these problems that we have today. They didn't call it post-traumatic stress syndrome, but they saw people killed in battle or crucified on Roman crosses there in the outskirts of the city. So you can believe that they suffered from PTSD. They had anxiety, depression, and thoughts of self-harm. Some of the most significant people in the Bible thought of suicide. Moses, Elijah, and Jonah all had thoughts of suicide. The Psalms reflects the mountaintops of praise and celebration, but it also reflects the deepest pits of doom and despair. Jesus quoted Psalm 22, verse 1 on the cross when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" David and the other writers of the Psalms struggle with the same feelings of anxiety and depression that we do, but they held on to their faith through it all. Jesus spent most of his time with people who we would consider broken. He was criticized for it and responded, "It's the sick, not the well, who need a physician." He was compassionate and caring, and sometimes he addressed their mind in the process of healing them. To one, he said, "Your faith has made you well," emphasizing you trusted in a God who cares for you. That's what helped you. To the paralytic who was brought to Jesus by his friends, he said, "Your sins are forgiven you," rather than saying you're healed. Because he knew that this man's paralysis was more than a physical problem, it was also a mental or spiritual problem as well. Carl Menninger, the famous Topeka, Kansas psychiatrist, once said, "It is unlove that makes us unwell, and it is love and only love that can make us well again." Jesus certainly showed love to the people that most people had ignored or ostracized. He showed them, "You matter to me. You matter to God. You are loved." And he invited them, "Come and follow me." One of those broken people was Mary Magdalene. She is described as a woman from whom Jesus cast out 7 demons. Some scholars today believe that maybe she suffered from a mental illness like schizophrenia, and Jesus somehow cured her. John reports that it was to Mary Magdalene that Jesus first appeared after his resurrection. Following Jesus won't mean that you won't face times of depression and anxiety. The disciples on the road to Emmaus in Luke chapter 24, on that first Easter morning, were depressed and lonely. They felt discouraged and without hope. But what they later realized is that Jesus was walking with them on that road. And when we walk through dark times, we have that assurance too. He is by our side. Jesus didn't come so that every single human being who struggled with physical or mental illness would be instantaneously healed if people just prayed for them, or if they prayed hard enough or got a big group of people praying for them. He came to walk in the midst of our pain and brokenness. He experienced the worst that this life can offer, and eventually he experienced death itself. He understands what we're going through, and he promises that he can take even the worst times that we faced and work something good for them, good for us, out of them. In today's text, we read about Jesus sailing with his disciples sailing across the Sea of Galilee during an especially scary storm, and then to top it off, they see a figure walking toward them on the waves, and feared as a ghost, no doubt that they thought was going to take them down to a watery grave. But it was Jesus, and he cried out to them as they cried out in fear. He called to them and said, "It's me, don't be afraid." Peter said, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." And as you recall, Peter got out of the boat and walked several steps to Jesus as long as he kept his focus on him. But when he started to look at the wind and the waves, he began to sink. So he cried, "Lord, save me." And Jesus reached down and pulled him to safety. And then when he got in the boat, the storm died down. The point of the story is not that Jesus will calm every storm, but that he will come to you in the middle of yours, in the middle of those stormy times that you deal with, and he is with you. And he uses us today to do his work. Sometimes we are the way he calms others and helps others to care for one another, to bear one another's burdens, and thus fulfill the law of Christ, it says in Galatians 6:2. To love one another even as we love ourselves, and even as he has loved us. And when you find yourself, though, sinking into the storms of life and the waves and the wind around you have overwhelmed you, this story points out to us that it's okay to call out for help. Peter didn't just say, "I got this, Lord," when he started going down. He said, "Lord, save me," immediately. And Jesus reached down to help. It's okay to call for help. It's okay. I'm with you. That's what Jesus would say to those dealing with anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues today. You're not alone. I will be with you always. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace now and forevermore. Amen.